Join me as we learn Chumash for Friday, the sixth Torah reading of Parsha Shemini, chapter 11, verse 1. Today we're going to learn about the different laws of kosher, the prohibited and permitted animals, fish, and bird species. Chapter 11, verse 1. Vaydaber Hashem al Moshe v'al Aaron leimer aleim. And God spoke to Moses and Aaron, saying to them. Rashi. El Moshe v'al Aaron to Moshe and to Aaron. Moshe Omar sheyemer la'Aaron. He told it to Moshe, who will then tell Aaron. Leimer alein. Moshe then said it. Omar said to Aaron sheyemer la'Elazar v'Isamar, who said it then to Elazar and Isamar. Eoi eine ela leimer l'Yisrael. Or did Aaron say it to his sons Elazar and Isamar? Or was he supposed to then tell it to the Jewish people? When he says speak to the Jewish people, so if it says speak to the Jewish people, that means he himself tells it to the Jewish people. So what do I get from here? Why does he have to say tell it to them if he's already telling it to them? So first, Labanov. First he would tell it to his sons Elazar and Isamar. And then afterwards they would tell it to entire Jewish people as well. Verse 2. Dabra b'nei Yisrael, speak to the Jewish people, they are saying, Zeis hachaya, this is the animal, the following creatures, asher teichlu, that you may eat, mikol behema asher al aretz, among all the land animals that are on the earth. He says as follows, Dabra b'nei Yisrael, as kulam hishvali yishlichum adibar zeh, he made all of them equal, meaning to Aaron and his sons, that they will be messengers in this message to the Jewish people. Because they were equally quiet when their brothers passed and when their son, or when Aaron's sons passed, and they accepted God's decree out of love, therefore they were given this message, this errand to tell the Jewish people about the laws of kosher. The word chaya in this case means living animal or any animal. Lishin chayim comes about alive. Because the Jewish people are connected to God and therefore they should be alive, as we say in the book of Deuteronomy. That when you connect to God, you're truly alive. Therefore, he separated them, he segregates them from the impure items. The gazar mitzvahs, and he gave them the gazar alei mitzvahs, and gave them these commandments. However, to the nations of the world, they do not have these prohibitions of kosher. Like this example that's given about a doctor who goes to visit ill patient. He goes to do different patients. He sees one of them that's in danger. He tells his family, Rashi doesn't say the parable, but this is the parable that's brought in Tanchuma, from Rabbi Tanchuma, that a doctor comes in to see two ill people, two patients. One of them, he sees that they're in great danger, so he tells his family, give him anything he wants to eat. He saw the second one that's going to live, so he said, only this and these foods he should eat. So they asked the doctor why this guy gets whatever he wants and this guy doesn't get. This guy can only get certain foods. So he says, "Listen here, this guy that's going to be alive, that he's alive, and I know there's a chance. So therefore, he has to be careful what he eats. The other guy that's going to die anyway, you can give him whatever you want." He says the same thing is also God, who tells the Jewish people are alive. Then God says, "I want you to be holy." So therefore, they have a status of holiness they have to stay by. And therefore we have a reason to be sanctuary, and therefore we have a reason to be sanctified and to be holy and to be careful what we eat, because we have a concept of life which is beyond a life which we can see. And therefore when he talks about Vatzachaya, the one that's alive, it means this nation is worthy of being constantly fed alive. Why does it say this is the animal? That every time it says the word Zeis or Zeh means that he was pointing. He was holding the animal, that every time we're talking about a specific animal, he would hold it up and show the Jewish people, this is what I'm talking about. Even when he come to the creatures of the water, he held each one of them in his hand and showed it to the Jewish people what they're allowed to and what they're not allowed to eat. So when it came with the birds, and it came with the creatures, and all the different things that we're soon going to be learning in the various verses that tell us about the things that they're allowed to eat, the pure and impure, he held it up to them and he showed them what it is. This is what's impure. Moshe had to show them exactly what he's talking about. This is the animal, domestic animals from all the animals that that roam the land. So therefore, we see that a domestic animal is also called an animal. Rashi, verse 3, Kil mafresas parsa, anyone whose feet are, anyone who has split hooves, v'shisas shesa, anyone whose feet are cloven, let's do Kil mafresas parsa v'shisas shesa says, anyone whose feet are not only partially cloven, but completely split, the meaning that they have the split hooves, Milas Geda, and regurgitates its food, Babahema by an animal, Oisa Techelu, those are the ones that you're allowed to eat. Mafresas, what is the word mafresas parsa? Stika, it has like a crack, it's open. Parsa, that means the bottom of the leg of the animal, that it's open. Shisas shesa, besides from the fact that it has to be open, muvdelis, it has to be completely separated. L'maylu l'mata, on the top and the bottom, not only from what you can see, but also underneath it has to be open. B'shnei tziparnim by its nails, kedarkuma metalfin klofin, shepersisei stukes b'mayla ve'enu shesuyis muvdelis l'gamd l'mata. He says there are those animals that you can see that they're not completely, their hooves are not completely split. They're only split from the top and not from the bottom. Maila is geta, that it regurgitates its food. Maila brings it up. Umakia regurgitates the food. Mimamea from its stomach. Umachzerer, so he said it brings it back up l'techpia to its mouth. L'koshte, to grind it. L'tachne, and to mull it. L'hadek, very fine. So it brings it up. It swallows it. It spits it back up, and then chews on it again, and then swallows it again. Geira, kach shmoi. This is what it's called when a person eats food and keeps on chewing it again. This is what it's called. The word geira. It's possible that it comes from the word lias migizras, from the concept that we see from the word, the root word kamayim anigorim, like the food, like the water that drips and pours on the ground. So it goes up, and then the meaning that it gets dragged along. That it comes from the stomach and it gets dragged into the mouth and it gets dragged back down. The Targum Unclus, the Aramaic translation is Pishra, he calls it like it becomes diluted, becomes soft, and because the animal chews it so much, it becomes very soft and diluted and dissolved. But behema, tevazu yaseri, technically this word, the animal, is extra. And what is it coming to tell me? L'darsha, it's coming to teach me lahatir sashlil, to tell me that a baby calf that's born in the mother's womb, that's in its mother's womb, will be permissible without needing slaughtering. That you can eat. You could not eat a impure animal. Isn't it clear that it says? But it's coming to tell me that a person who eats non-kosher will then be abrogating a positive commandment and a negative commandment. Verse 4. You must not eat those animals who do regurgitate their food, and they may have and they have split feet, because it could be it regurgitates food. So for example, the camel, it regurgitates its food. But it does not have completely split hooves. It doesn't have complete cloven feet. And therefore, Tamir Lachem, it is something which is spiritually defiled for you to eat. Verse 5, Ves HaShafan, the Hyrex, Kimai Legera, because it regurgitates its cuds, Parsa Yafris, but does not have split hooves, it does not have completely cloven feet. Tamir Lachem, it's also impure for you. Ves Neves, verse 6, and the hair, Kimai Legera, chews its cuds, Parsa Yafrisa, but it does not have the split hooves. It is also impure for you to eat. Verse 7, Ves HaChazir, and the pig, Kimafris parsa does have split hooves, and those that are completely split. But the problem is, it doesn't chew its cuds. Therefore, it's spiritually defiled for you to eat. Verse 8, their meat you should not eat. Go, and in their flesh and in their carcasses you should not touch. They are ritually defiled for you. Rashi says, on eating their flesh, is the prohibition, but not about their bones, or their veins and their sinews, and their horns, and their hooves, because those are things that are not edible to eat. Ubenivlasam loisigo, yochel I would think Yisrael Musarim al Magan Avela. That I would think when it comes touching, that the Jewish people are prohibited from touching something which is impure. Talmud Leimer, Emer al-Kehanim, Kehanim Musarim Yisrael Musarim. That when it comes to touching something which is impure, a carcass which is impure, only the Kohanim are not allowed to touch it, but not the regular Israelites. Kavachemar me'ata. From here we can learn a even stricter case. Ma tumas meis. If, when it comes to a dead carcass, a person who's dead, chamura, which this is stringent, which in that case a person is pure for 7 days, and they need to be sprinkled by the blood of the red heifer to be able to become pure. Leihizerba lekehanim. And in that case, the only ones that who are warned with this, who have that obligation, are the Kohanim. However, the rest of the Jewish people, they are not warned by it. Tumas nevela, kala. When it comes to a tumas nevela, when it comes to such a case of impurity which is less stringent, why does the Torah have to tell me not to touch it? So what is this we're talking about? Beregel, it's talking about on a holiday. In a holiday when all the Jewish people have to come up to the Holy Temple. They have to be ready to walk into the Holy Temple at all times. Therefore, he tells us that even then, an Israelite has to be careful not to touch these items. Meaning as follows, that there are many times that a Kohen is not allowed to add impurity onto himself. And therefore, a Kohen is not allowed to touch a dead person. An Israelite is allowed to touch a dead person, but when he does touch the dead person, he has to go through the process of purification, which is the sprinkling of the red heifer and 7 days of impurity. A Kohen is not even allowed to become impure. So if when it comes to the case where a Kohen is not allowed to become impure, an Israelite's allowed to, how much more in this case? So why does it mean you're not allowed to touch it? Meaning when it comes before the holiday, that you're about to go into the Holy Temple, so therefore you have to be careful not to make yourself impure, so you should be able to enter the Holy Temple. Verse 9. This you can eat from anything that's in the water, among all the creatures that are in the water. Whatever has fins and scales, in the water, bayamim and in the seas, and in the rivers, you may eat only these. Rashi, snapir. What are snapir? Elu sheshat. Those are the fins that helps the fish swim by shaking its fins. Kaskesas. Elu klipin hakvuyim boy. These are the scales. They're small, little round scales that are on the skin of the fish. They're like a shell of the fish. As it says by that Goliath, that he was wearing Visirian kaskasum ulavish. That Goliath was wearing. Goliath was wearing this armor that was like scales of a fish. Verse 10. But whatever lives in the seas and the rivers, but does not have fins and scales. By yamam and the cholim in the seas and the rivers, mikol shedet tamayim, from all the things that live in the water, mikol nefesh hachayish habamayim, or any living creature that's in the water, sheket seim lachem, they are considered loathsome to you, and therefore you should not have them. Sheretz, what does the word sheretz mean? Anytime it uses the terminology sheretz, it means something which is low, a crawling, creepy animal which creeps, or a creature that creeps on the earth. For example, bugs or any other things of that nature. Verse 11. You must consider them loathsome. From their flesh you may not eat. And their carcasses you must consider loathsome. Rashi, v'sheketz yiyu, verse 11, leser eseruveya, meaning that even if a impure fish, a non-kosher fish, is mixed in with kosher fish, still in all, their taste and has been absorbed in it, it's considered not kosher. If it gives over the flavor, all of it will then make everything else prohibited. Their flesh you're not allowed to have. However, the fins or the bones are not considered the flesh. This includes, when he talks about that even their carcasses that come from the water, this includes Yavchushin, which means these are midgets or strain, the different maggots or different kinds of bugs that may come from the water, that are also when you strain them, they come you see them in the water, and those kinds of things are called afchushin, and these are, as in Old French, it's called moshering, and those are also prohibited as well. Verse 12. Anything that does not have fins and scales when it's in the water, sheket sulachem, this is something which is disgusting to you. Verse 12. What's it coming to tell me? He said already, if it doesn't have fins and scale, why does it have to repeat it again? I would have thought the only thing that becomes, what kind of fish is permitted? Only one that comes onto dry land with its fins and scales. But what about a fish that the scales fall off in the water? Minayin, how do we know that it's kosher? Talmud Leimar, therefore the verse tells us, anything that has fins and scales while it's in the water, that if there is fins and scales while it's in the water, even though the scales may fall off once it comes on the dry land, mutar, it would still be permissible. So even if it sheds its scales, it will still be considered permissible to be eaten. Verse 13. And these you will consider loathsome, disgusting from the birds. You will not eat them. Sheketzim, there's something which is considered loathsome. Esa nesher, now he continues to tell us about the different birds which will be prohibited to eat. Esa nesher, the griffin vulture, Vesa peres, and the bearded vulture, Vesa oznia, and the osprey. Verse 13. They should not be eaten, and you cannot feed them to somebody else. And therefore he says as follows. This also obligates a person who gives it to young children. This is what it seems from the verse. It should not be eaten because of you. Or maybe this doesn't mean that you can have pleasure from it. Therefore the verse tells us someplace else in the book of Deuteronomy. You can't eat them. They're prohibited from eating, but you're allowed to have pleasure from them. Therefore, what does this mean? If you're going to look, it's going to say in this Torah reading, in the next few verses, it's going to say birds and according to its kind. Why does it say according to its kind? Because in every kind of bird, there's many different generations and many different variables of that bird. They're not the same, they're not even called the same, they don't even look the same. But they're all part of the same family, and therefore they are prohibited. Now he goes on to say the different birds. Verse 14. Vesada, vesa'aya lamina. And the various other species of the vulture as well. Verse 15. Ve'eskol eirav lamina. And every type of species of a crow. Verse 16. Ve'speisayana, vesatachmas, vesashochav, vesanetz. The ostrich, the cuckoo, the gull, the various species of the sparrow hawk. Hanetz, Rashi translates in the French, Ishberir. Vesakois, Vesashalach, Vesayanshuf, the screech owl, the cormorant, and the barn owl. Hashalach, Rashi says, verse 17, Pirushu Rabbi Seinu, the rabbis explained what is this shalach. This is a fish that fishes, that takes out fish, it draws fish from the sea. That's why the Targum translates it shalininu, meaning that it traps, it takes out, it catches fish from the sea. Kois v'yanchuf, heim hatzayikim b'layla. These are the kind of birds that scream at night. V'yeshlam l'sasis ka'adam, they have cheeks like a human. V'oid acher doimel shekoyren yibum. And there's another bird that's very similar to it, that's also part of the yanshuf, and that's why it says to its kind, it's called yibum. Verse 18, Vesatin shamas vesakov vesaracham, the bat, the pelican, and the magpie. Tinshamas that we mentioned before, that was over here we're talking about the tinshamas, which we translate as the bat, and Rashi explains, he kalba shuritz, This is what we call in French kal b'shurit. It's a bird that's similar to a weasel or a mouse, and it flies at night. The tinshametz that's mentioned later on about the different creatures is very similar to it. It doesn't have eyes. As we know today, it's what we call a bat. 19. The stork, hanofa limina, and the various species of the heron. Vesaduchifas and the hupu, vesatalif and the atalif. Rashi, hachasida, zu daya levana, tziguna. This is, if we look later on in the book of Deuteronomy, it tells us a type of bird which is called a daya. And this daya, which is a quarrelsome, and it's called a hyron in Old French. Why is it called a chasida? Because it does kindness with its mates, with its birds, and that it splits, that it splits the food amongst them. Ha'anafa. So there's two types of daya. The chasida is the white daya, is the zigzone. And over here, it's called a chasida because it acts generously. The hanafa, this is daya ragzonis. It seems that this is the quarrelsome daya, the one that gets upset. This is what they call a hyron. Haduchifas, what's the duchifas? This is a wild hen, tarnagil habor, a wild hen, v'karbalosei kfula, and it has a comb that's doubled over. Ubilaz, and in Old French it's called harupa, hurpa. What is it called? Duchifas. Shahoidu kafus. Because its majesty, that means its beautiful web that's on top of it, its comb, appears to be tied down. That it's betargum, and he karbalase, and that's its comb. Nikra ubetargum unclus, and the unclus translation. V'nagir tura nikra shemaisaf. Why is it called Uchifas? Because it's, in this case, because it's the cutter of a mountain, an account of its habits, as the rabbis explained in Misha Achsu, that it was able to fly away this far into high mountains where there are no trees there, and they would bring the shamir. The shamir was that special worm that we spoke about that splits the rocks, and that's what King Solomon used to be able to cut the stones for the Holy Temple. Verse 20. Kol sheretz ha'oif. Now we're going to continue telling us about flying, crawling creatures that are permitted and some that are prohibited for consumption as well. Kol sheretz ha'oif ha'hilech al arba. You must consider loathsome any type of crawling creature that flies and walks on four. Sheketzu lachem is considered loathsome to you. So which ones can you eat? However, these you could eat mikol sheretz ha'oif, from all the creatures, the flying creatures, ha'hilech arba, that go in four. Asher lo yikra'ayim, that have joint extensions, mimal l'raglav, above their regular legs, l'nater bahen ala oretz, for which they hop around on the ground. So they have extension legs. They have Rashi, sheretz ha'oif, heima daken ha'manuchem ha'reichashim ala oretz. These are the very small ones that they creep and crawl or on the ground. K'gein zvuvim, like flies, etzroin, and mosquitoes, v'yetushim v'chagavim, and grasshoppers. Al arba, Rashi 21, al arba laglaim, on the four legs. Mimal l'raglav samach l'tzavari, closer to its neck. Leshli yikamin shtei raglaim. It has like two legs, one that's closer to the neck, and then it bends again, and there's another leg. Milvad avra laglav, besides its four legs. When it wants to fly and jump off the ground, it gets strengthens with those two knees, and then it lifts itself up and flies. There's many different kinds amongst them, like those that they call lushta, but we are not thorough to know which ones are kosher or not. There are four different signs of what it makes it kosher. Meaning, it needs to have arba raglayim, it has to have four legs, arba knafayim, four wings, v'karsulin, and it needs to have these elukrai, and these are the knees that are mentioned here, uknaf of chayfim esrubei, and the wings have to cover most of its body. And And all these signs we find by many of the grasshoppers that we have here. However, Aval, there is something which is different, that the one that is kosher is called a chagav. Aval, there are some differences. Yesh reishanorach, those that are long head. Yesh elam zanav, the ones that don't have a tail. V'tzarich she'emoy shmei chagav, but you need that it to be called a chagav. And with this, we don't know which one is called a chagav today, and that's what Rashi is writing in his time. They didn't know they were all called chagav, or they didn't know which one is actually biblically called chagav, and therefore they didn't need it. There was a tradition, I think, by the Yemenites that they do know which one is, and they claim that in the back, if you look at the belly of it underneath, there's like a shape of a ches that you can know that it's a chagav. That's according to some traditions, but Rashi says that we don't know which one it is, and therefore we don't need it. Verse 22. As Elameham Teichalu, these are the ones that you're allowed to eat. As a Arbeliminoi, the red locust and all its varieties of its species. As a Salam Lumineu, the yellow locust and all its varieties and its species. As a Charga Lumineu, and the spotted gray locust and all its varieties and species. As a Chagav Lumineu, and the white locust and all its variety and its species. There are different pictures that you can look up today that you can see which ones are the red locust, white locust, and the ones that would be allowed. Verse 23. And nonetheless, any four-legged flying, crawling creatures that has four legs, as we mentioned, should be loathsome to you. The Chol Shartzeif, Balalamid, it comes to teach us, that if it has 5 legs, Torah would be pure. Verse 24, and all these as well. Additionally, that if a person will come into contact with these kind of things, you'll become defiled, and anyone who touches their carcass is defiled until the evening. What does it mean? Those that he's going to mention now in the next few verses. That by touching them itself, you become impure. Verse 25. Whoever carries their carcass, will have to wash his clothing, will be impure until the evening. Anytime that it tells us about carrying something that will make you impure, it is more stringent than touching, which with touching you would only have to wash your clothing. Over here, by carrying it, the person himself becomes impure as well. Verse 26. You must consider among all animals that walk. You must consider all animals whose feet are partially open, but not completely split. And do not chew its coats. They do not regurgitate their food. They're impure to you. Whoever touches them, yitma, becomes impure. Rashi, like which ones? For example, going gummel like a camel, that it has a crack, lamaila only on top, but underneath it's connected. Over here, the Torah is telling us that even telling us that the carcass of a impure animal can make somebody pure. And later on, when he talks about a carcass, that animal, he's telling us about a kosher animal. And this is the difference. When it comes to an impure animal, whether it died on its own or whether it died through slaughtering, it will make a person impure. However, when it comes to a kosher animal, it will only make somebody impure when it died on its own. However, when it was slaughtered with a proper, according to Jewish law, and then afterwards you find out that it was unhealthy and therefore it would have died, that's called a treifa, that would not make somebody impure. Though you're not allowed to eat it, that's not considered something of an avela to make impure. Verse 27, anything that goes on its and anything that you must consider, anything of the animals that walk on 4 legs, and all animals that walk on 4 legs, they are impure to you. Whoever touches their carcass, yitma the aref, will be impure until the evening. Rashi, al kapov, what does it mean on its legs? Meaning that they don't have hooves, they don't have split feet. For example, kelev, a dog, doiv, a bear, a chosel, a cat, that they only have like legs, palms, and they don't have any split hooves, and therefore they walk on the palms of their feet, and it's like a person walking barefoot, so to speak. Tmeim hem lechem, they're impure to you, lamaga, even to touch, and so too to carry as well. Vanoises nivlasam, one who carries, verse 28, Vanoises nivlasam, one who carries their carcasses. Michabis begadav must wash his clothes, v'tamei ad ha'arev, and be impure until the evening. Tmeim hem alachem, they are considered ritually impure for you. Rashi. No Rashi on this one. Verse 29. V'zel lachem hatamei, and this will be what is impure when it comes to the continuing telling us what's impure, but concerning the creatures, about the crawling things. Hasheiretz alad, anything that crawls on the earth, on the ground, which is, for example, achoiled, the weasel, ha'achbar, the mouse, v'atzav, and the toad, lemineu, and all its kind of species. Verse 29, Rashi, v'zelachem atami, kol tumas alalu, these impurities, eino le'isur chila, they're not referring to a prohibition of eating, ela l'tuma mamish, meaning that if a person touches these, they become impure, literally. Liyastami b'magna, just by touching them, a person becomes impure. The nesel lechel b'truma v'kacham l'kanis b'migdash. By eating this, you become impure to the extent that you will not be able to eat from the holy food of the truma, or the holy food, or enter the holy temple. Hachoiled, the choiled we said was the weasel. This is what in the Talmud you would find what's called a chulda. Hatzav shadem l'tzvardei, that's a toad, it's like a frog. Verse 30, ha'anaka v'hakoyach v'alata, the hedgehog, the chameleon, the lizard, the snail, the choimet v'atinshames, and the mole. Rashi, anaka, he says, haritzun, kipud, he gives the different terminologies in the Old French of what these names of these animals are. So anaka is in Old French, it's a hedgehog, a harrison. Halata is a lizard. A choimet is a limus, or a snail. And tinshames is a mole. And Rashi goes through these and gives us all the French words. Verse 31. These are the ones that are going to be of these crawling creatures which we have to consider impure. Whoever touches them while they're dead, yitma da aref, will be impure until the evening. Verse 32. And those, as we mentioned, these creatures, that what happens if any of these dead creatures fall on anything? While they're dead, yitma, they will make it impure as well. Mikol kliates, whether it's a something of wood, a wooden vessel, a beged or a garment, a or a hide, a sack or a sack, kol kliya sheyasam alachabem, anything that's a vessel that can be used for work that can be done with it. Bamayim yuva will have to be immersed in water. V'tamei ad ha'arev, and will be impure until the evening. V'tayr, and only once it becomes the evening, then can it be get rid of its defilement and it will be pure once again. Rashi bamayim yuva, meaning it has to be immersed in water. Even though a person already immersed in water, tummy will still be impure. L'truma ad ha'arev, for having to using it for holy items until the evening. And only once it becomes evening, then he'll be able to use it. This concludes the 6th Torah reading of Parshas Shemini.